I still remember the look in Grandpa's eyes that morning at the airport. Tired but excited. He wore the same brown cardigan he always did on important days, the one with the fraying elbows and that faint scent of lavender Grandma used to spray on everything. My mother had insisted on taking him with us on our trip back home, claiming it was finally time he got the care he deserved. But something about the way she avoided his gaze while checking the papers didn't sit right with me. "Papa," she said, placing a trembling hand on his shoulder. "Just sit right here, okay? We'll come back for you once we sort out the papers." Before we dive into the story, we'll love to thank you for your continued support to this channel. If you enjoy this story and stories like this, kindly subscribe and hit on the notification button so you don't miss any of our stories. We will love to hear from you also. Tell us where you're watching from in the comment section. We'll love to give you a shout out in our next video. Now let's begin. We were at the far corner of Terminal B, near the oversized windows that looked out onto the tarmac. Grandpa nodded quietly, placing his worn cap gently on his lap, and smiled at me. I smiled back uneasily. That would be the last peaceful moment I had for the next 2 hours. My mother grabbed my arm and hurried me toward the check-in counters, my questions drowned by the chaos of announcements and rolling suitcases. She seemed jittery, kept glancing behind her like someone expecting trouble. "What about Grandpa?" I asked. She hushed me, said it wouldn't take long. But long it became. 15 minutes passed, then 30, then a full hour. I asked again, more firmly, but she brushed me off with, "I said we'll go back for him. Stop asking." Something felt off. Every instinct in me screamed that this wasn't right. And when the second hour passed, I'd had enough. I slipped away from her in the crowd, ignoring her calls. My feet raced back toward the place where we left him. But when I got there, the seat was empty. Gone. No Grandpa. No cardigan. No cap. Just an empty seat and a folded-up boarding pass on the ground. That's when I knew, whatever papers my mom was sorting out, they had nothing to do with check-in. And if I didn't act fast, I might never see him again. I stood frozen, staring at the empty seat as the world around me buzzed with the usual airport chaos. Families rushing past with strollers, overhead announcements crackling in several languages, the beeping of carts hauling luggage. But all I could hear was the hollow echo of my heartbeat. Grandpa was gone. 2 hours had passed, and my mother had made no effort to come back. My stomach twisted with guilt. I should have stayed. I should have fought harder. I should have known something wasn't right. I bent down to pick up the folded boarding pass left on the seat. It wasn't his ticket, it was mine. She must have dropped it earlier while yanking me away. On the back of it was a number, scribbled hastily in blue ink. A local phone number. I didn't recognize it, but my gut told me it wasn't a mistake. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and dialed it. The call went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. Panic surged through me. I started asking around, approaching security guards, airline staff, even passengers. Showing them Grandpa's photo and asking if anyone had seen an elderly man with a brown cardigan and a gray cap. Most people shrugged. One janitor said he thought he'd seen someone matching that description being helped toward the exit by a woman in a red coat. My mom was wearing red. I ran straight out of the terminal into the warm, sticky afternoon air. I scanned every car, every face, every movement in the pickup area. My lungs ached from the sprint, but I wouldn't stop. Not until I found him. Not until I knew why my mother would do something like this. Then I saw it. A cab pulling away, and through the rear windshield, a flash of brown fabric and silver hair. "Grandpa," I shouted, chasing the cab into traffic. Horns blared. Tires screeched. I nearly got hit, but I didn't care. My voice cracked as I yelled again. But the cab was already gone, swallowed by the city. Tears burned my eyes, not just from fear, but from a sudden wave of realization. My mother hadn't forgotten Grandpa. She had abandoned him, and I had no idea where he was being taken, or why. But I did know one thing. If my mother thought she could get rid of him quietly, she had miscalculated. Because now, I was going to find him, and I was going to make her tell me everything. I didn't sleep that night. After hours of filing a missing persons report and arguing with airport staff, who seemed more annoyed than concerned, I ended up curled on a stiff bench outside Terminal B, staring at the number I'd called earlier. Still no answer. No texts. Just silence. My mother? She wasn't answering either. I tried her phone 6 times. Each time it rang, then went dead. I knew she was ignoring me, and that meant she had something to hide. The only question was how deep it went. The next morning, I headed straight to the taxi stand. With the help of a sympathetic driver who recognized the car from my vague description, I tracked down the cab company and convinced the dispatcher to check the route history. After some haggling and a $50 tip I couldn't afford, he pulled up a log. My heart nearly stopped when I saw it. The drop-off address was a nursing home 2 towns over, one I'd never heard of. I didn't wait. I took the next train out and rode in silence, gripping the armrest with white knuckles. My thoughts bounced between anger and fear. Why would she take him there without telling me? Why lie? Grandpa had always said he wanted to stay with family, not end up in a place where no one remembers your birthday. And now she had dumped him like an unwanted suitcase. When I arrived at the facility, I nearly kicked the front door open. The place looked sterile and bleak. White walls, linoleum floors, and the faint smell of bleach and loneliness. The receptionist looked up, startled, as I slammed Grandpa's photo on the counter. "I'm here for him," I said, almost breathless. She blinked. "You must be the grandson?" I nodded slowly. She sighed. "Your mother left him here yesterday. Signed a few papers. Then she left." "Left?" I choked. Just like that. She said she'd return next week to finish the transfer. "Transfer?" I asked, ice forming in my chest. She hesitated. "Your grandfather's apartment was signed over. Power of attorney, medical decisions. She's taking full control." "No." I stormed through the hallway and found him in a small shared room, sitting by a window that overlooked nothing but a patch of grass and a brick wall. His cardigan was still buttoned to the top. His cap sat on the bedside table. And yet, when he looked at me, he smiled. Genuinely, kindly, like he hadn't been abandoned by the one person who should have never done it. "I knew you'd come," he said, voice soft and brittle. I hugged him so tight I thought I'd break him. "I'm getting you out of here," I whispered. He nodded slowly, but I saw the sadness in his eyes. And that was when I knew this wasn't just about negligence. My mother had a plan. She didn't want Grandpa to follow us. She wanted everything he had, his benefits, his account, his apartment, and no one to question her. But she didn't count on me standing in the way. Now I had to act. Legally, emotionally, strategically, and most of all, before it was too late. I spent that evening by Grandpa's side, trying not to let the anger on my face spill over into my words. He deserved peace, not more worry. I helped him eat, listened to him hum the songs Grandma used to play, and promised him I'd fix everything. But inside, I was boiling. My mother had always been two-faced, sweet when she needed you, ruthless when you couldn't fight back. I just never thought she'd stoop so low. Not to him. Not to the man who raised her when her own father left. The next morning, I got to work. I called a lawyer, a friend of mine from college who specialized in elder rights, and explained the whole situation. He told me that if Grandpa was of sound mind, we could challenge the power of attorney. But we had to act quickly before my mother completed the transfer of his assets. We needed proof that she acted without his full consent, that it was a manipulation, or worse, abandonment. I turned to Grandpa. "Do you remember signing anything?" He frowned, nodding slowly. "There were papers." She said it was just to make the trip easier. Something about the airport needing a guardian listed. I swallowed hard. "Did you read it?" He shook his head. "That was it. Deception." I filed a formal complaint with Adult Protective Services and submitted documentation to the court. My lawyer arranged for a psychologist to evaluate Grandpa, confirming that he was still mentally capable of making his own decisions. The case was shaky. It would take time, but we had a shot. Meanwhile, I stayed close to him, making sure my mother couldn't slip back in and finish what she started. It wasn't long before she found out what I was doing. She called me in a rage. "Are you seriously trying to undo all of this? You have no idea the stress I've been under. You left your father alone at an airport," I snapped. "You tricked him into signing away his life. You don't deserve to speak his name. Oh, grow up. That old man was going to die in that stuffy apartment. At least now he's somewhere clean, with nurses. You should thank me." I hung up. I wasn't going to argue with someone who weaponized kindness. But she'd made one mistake. She underestimated what a grandson would do when someone touched the man who taught him to ride a bike, tie a tie, and fix a broken fence with nothing but duct tape and a laugh. She tried to bury him quietly. Now I was going to dig up everything she thought was safe. The court date came faster than I expected, but not before I uncovered something my mother never thought I'd find: an old envelope hidden at the bottom of Grandpa's toolbox. I'd been back at his apartment, sorting through what was left, looking for any documents we could use to prove his true intentions. That's when I found it. A letter addressed to me in Grandpa's own handwriting, sealed years ago, just after Grandma passed. Inside was a simple note. "If they ever try to put me away like I'm nothing, remember this. I trust you, and only you, to do what's right. Love, always, Grandpa." Attached to the note was a copy of a notarized document he had signed 6 years earlier, a power of attorney naming me as his medical and legal representative. The original, he explained in the letter, was with a lawyer named Dawson, an old friend he hadn't spoken to in a while. My heart raced. If the original was still valid and on file, it would override anything my mother had tricked him into signing. I called Dawson's office, and, by sheer luck, or maybe fate, they still had it in their archives. The next day, my lawyer filed an emergency motion with the court, and suddenly everything changed. The court ordered a freeze on all pending asset transfers. My mother was summoned. She showed up in court wearing grief like a costume, her voice trembling as she tried to spin a tale about doing what was best for Dad. She claimed Grandpa was confused, that I was manipulating him out of guilt for being an absent grandson. Then I handed the judge the envelope. The courtroom went silent. The judge read the letter, examined the notarized form, and looked straight at my mother. "Ms. Carson," he said slowly, "this power of attorney predates the one you filed and was never revoked. You had no legal right to act on your father's behalf." Her mouth opened, then closed. I turned to Grandpa. He was seated beside me, holding my hand, eyes glistening. The judge continued, "Effective immediately, full authority returns to the original holder of power of attorney, his grandson. Any transfers made will be reviewed, and restitution will be considered." My mother stood frozen as the bailiff handed her a notice. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Later that night, Grandpa and I returned to his apartment together. I helped him inside, made him tea, and put on one of Grandma's old jazz records. He smiled, listening to the scratchy sound of the vinyl turning. "You saved me," he whispered. I sat beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "No, Grandpa, you saved me long before I even knew what saving meant." And just like that, we closed the door, not just on the apartment, but on everything she tried to take away. Weeks passed, and things began to settle. Grandpa moved back into his apartment, now secured under my guardianship. I made sure his benefits were restored, his accounts unfrozen, and most importantly, that he was never left waiting by a window again. But something still stung. My mother hadn't called since the court ruling. No apology, no explanation, just silence. A silence that echoed every time I remembered the way she walked away from the man who raised her. One afternoon, Grandpa and I returned to the airport, not to fly, but to visit the very bench where he sat alone that day. He wanted to see it. Needed to. I didn't understand at first, but I went with him. He wore his cap again, the same one from that day, and carried a small paper bag with him. When we arrived at Terminal B, we found the exact seat by the window. He sat down slowly, letting the memories wash over him without a word. 2 hours I waited here, he said finally, and not once did I believe you wouldn't come back. I sat beside him, stunned. You weren't scared? He shook his head. You don't raise a child to be perfect. You raise them to know who they are. I knew who you were, and I knew who she became. He reached into the bag and pulled out a tiny wooden plaque. Etched into it were the words, "For the man who was never left behind." I helped him screw it discreetly beneath the bench. A quiet tribute, not one anyone would notice, unless they were looking. As we walked away, I glanced back once more. That bench didn't just hold the memory of abandonment. It now held the memory of a rescue, of a promise fulfilled. I never told anyone what my mother tried to do after. She emailed once, begging for forgiveness, claiming she was overwhelmed, misunderstood, just doing what made sense. But I didn't reply. Some bridges, once burned, don't need rebuilding. Not when the people on the other side chose to light the match. From that day forward, Grandpa lived his life with dignity, and I lived mine with clarity. Because now I knew. You don't leave family behind at an airport, and you sure as hell don't let them sit alone, thinking they've been forgotten. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of someone you love, or someone you lost, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring stories like this to life, and gives a voice to those who refuse to be forgotten.